welcome to Real Ball Killer TV. This is I'm your co-host Michael. Right here, as always, we have the often imitated, never duplicated, the Real Bottle Killer. And tell me, as always, how the hell are you, Real Bottle Killer?
Doing well, warmed up now. Couple of drams gone down today, so yeah, feeling good.
Couple of drums and very little food, which you know what that means, entertainment. Catch it. So today we're gonna do a review of the Lindores Bourbon Cask 2.
Yep, Casks of Lindores, Bourbon Cask 2.
So this is an interesting one. Lindores, you may have heard us talk about before, probably not because no one watches this shit anyway. But joke. My mum watches, and yours.
Yeah, sometimes.
Lindores Bourbon Cask 2. Lindores is kind of like, it was the first distillery that we ever visited, so it's like your first love, but it's going back to their actual release a couple of years later.
Yeah.
Is it going to be puppy love, or is it going to be like ride or die? As it stood the test of time, the love that we have for this place, because it's kind of like, we kind of feel like we visited, and when we did visit Lindores Distillery, they weren't even producing whiskey yet.
No,
they weren't even producing scotch. Why? What is that? Just tell the people the little fact about what is a scotch.
Yeah, so it reopened, didn't it? And they'd been distilling, but they hadn't had any distillate that had been in a oak cask for longer than 3 years, so they weren't able to release and officially call it scotch. They had something called aquavitae, which was almost like the new make spirit, I think, with some botanicals in it. It was actually pretty nice, very good in a cocktail.
But it was like this little white spirit, and you kind of had to jazz it up yourself, right? So we're there, we're little in this cold little building, and we have to. It wasn't cold. It's actually a lovely little bar area that they
nice,
had,
wasn't it? Yeah.
I was going to be uber dramatic, but we had to jazz it up ourselves, and so we had to mix it with ginger ale. We called it a Brass Roxy. Put a few little cuts of fruit in there as well, and. It was ginger ale and aquavitae,
yeah.
Brass Roxy. It was actually a good little cocktail that we created that day. I apologize, Lindores. Paul Sprung, our friend, left some terrible things in your guest book, but I'm sure it didn't offend anybody in this day and age. But let's move on swiftly and get away from that digression. Jay, you've already poured 2 drams.
Oh yeah.
But let us know, you're a member of Lindores Distillery, aren't you? And so just tell us, quickly, in the last sort of year or so, what have they been doing since they actually have been producing whiskies and not just aquavitae?
Yeah, I mean, they've got loads, man. They seem to have very high levels of production. So I think it was a couple of years ago now since the inaugural release came out. The Casks of Lindores is a kind of a limited release type series which focuses on the 3 main types of casks that they use. So predominantly they use sherry casks, STR casks, which are shaved, toasted and recharred, and bourbon casks. So the whiskey that we've got today is the Casks of Lindores 2. So they've released 1 of each in a full series. The 3rd release, which is the sherry cask one in the 2nd edition of Casks of Lindores, is coming out soon. But we tried this on our whiskey tour recently, back in November 2023, and it got bottle killed on the bus. Do you know what I mean? Everybody loved it. Everybody was having a great time, and I think I wanted to go back to it today to be were we just literally so buzzed we would have thought anything was amazing at that time, or I think we need to do it justice with a proper review, a proper tasting.
Yeah, because sometimes when you're on a whiskey tour, somebody will buy what they call a bus dram, which is the one that everybody shares on the bus, and there's usually probably about 2 bus drams going around at any one time if you go with people who are generous, which we do. We go with some very stand-up guys, but we so there's usually 2 or 3 bus drams going round and getting passed around, and at certain times people are like, no, I'm okay, and they'll pass it along. Some people will drink, and so it's kind of this little economy. It gets passed to me probably about 2 hours after we bought it, and it's empty. I wanted to take that home. It was so good, so good, and so yeah. But it was kind of one of those. It was nearer the end of the tour, and so it was one of those where I don't remember it specifically. I just remember how I felt when I got that bottle back and it was empty. I was like, no, I wanted to take this one back. But subsequently, you bought a new bottle on the back of that.
Of course. I think it's right. And I'm hoping, and I've already had a sneaky nose there, and I'm already sort of like, I've got a smile on my face. I think it's a sign of a good whiskey, right? Like sometimes with the bottle kills, like you get a great whiskey and it's so good you just want to keep drinking it, and then you get other whiskeys where like it's that good but you kind of want to preserve it. Like you're like, I can only have a dram of this on very special occasions because it's so good that I want to keep it. And I think this was a case of it's so good, like everybody just loved it and it just went down far too quickly. So.
And what's to say the availability on this? Because sometimes I think what plays into that. So, for example, if you get a Hazelburn 10 or you get a Springbank 10, it's like, well, I'm not going to get one for at least another year. So I need to make this last.
Yeah.
What's the availability on these? Obviously, the relatively new distillery, so they're not making like huge numbers of it. But is it widely available?
Very widely available, as I say. Like I think they've got a pretty large production capacity, and it is kind of marketed as a limited release. But I've never struggled to get these. I think even you can still get the casks of Lindores 1 for most of the bottles, even the bourbon cask. This is obviously the second edition of the series that they've done. It's I think they've got high production, and to be honest, I think the Lowlands is having a bit of a resurgence. You know, we've been drinking Lockley recently. We were very impressed with that. Glasgow Distillery, I was impressed with that. I tried it last year on my trip up there. King's Barnes have done some really good stuff, and I think actually, you know, I've got a fair few Lowlanders in my collection, and I highly rate them. As a young new kind of distillery, I don't think it's really developed that kind of cult following. I don't know if it is just because it's a lowland distillery and they're not like the popular region or what the cool kids are kind of thinking of at the moment, but I love it. Like I think really impressive stuff. Yeah, exactly. Good.
So yeah, we'll nose what you're getting on the nose. It's very classic bourbon cask, right?
It is classic bourbon cask, but I think it's like fruity as well. Almost kind of like tropical fruits. I think
I was gonna say pineapple.
Yeah,
I'm getting a pineapple
and banana as well. Like banana bread or like overripe kind of bananas. And it reminds me of, like, I probably should know more because I'm a member of the Lindores kind of like founding club. But I don't, and we've done a tour of there as well. I mean, many years ago, we don't always pay so much attention to the tours. But I don't know too much about like their distillation process and the fermentation, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was similar to Lockley, using those longer fermentations to draw out more of the fruity, more of the tropical notes, because that's what I'm getting here. Vanilla and tropical notes like all day long on that nose.
Yeah, definitely getting the fruitiness on it and the more of the tropical of those fruits.
And it's so much lighter, isn't it? Like both in colour, but I think just in terms of like the freshness, kind of like, floral, almost like...
I'm getting a creaminess on that nose as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Upon the palate, where's it taking me to? Memory, Scotland, bus. It's not actually, but it's first sip, my palate wasn't quite adjusted. Second sip, it's got that what I always talk about liking, where it's got like that seep into your tongue type quality about it. And
I think it's unquestionable that it is a young whiskey. It's not quite as rounded and balanced as some of the like Glencairn 10-year-old, for example, is probably twice as old as this. That's a really good bourbon cask whiskey. So there is, some of that, I don't want to say harshness. I'd say it's like it's not quite as balanced as a more aged whiskey. But it's right up my street. Like, this is just this is what I'm into at the moment. This is my style.
But what you find is that it's a little rough around the edges. but it's got this sweetness that kind of makes it, which is the balance in it. You know, that lovely little sweetness that you get from the palate to the finish. Kind of like that in between the palate and the finish. It kind of like makes up for that little roughness around the edges.
Yeah. It's almost kind of like barley sugar. I think like, creamy kind of porridge oats. Like you mentioned that creaminess on the nose. I find the kind of creamy texture, oaty cereal notes coming through on the palate with that vanilla. And then I think the rough and ready is that kind of what I find quite a lot with youthful bourbon cask whiskies is white pepper in the finish, like a tingle on the tongue, kind of.
But I always describe it as like when my tongue is really like rubbing the roof of my mouth, and you know, it's kind of like because it's like staying there, and I'm really enjoying it. So it's kind of got that quality to it. In terms of viscosity, what are you saying from that? In terms of viscosity point of view, is it thin? Is it chewy? What are you getting from it?
Somewhere in the middle for me. I don't think it's as chewy as some of the other whiskies that I've tried, and you know, thinking back to the Lockley when we did the review of that, like, you know, okay, that was a mixture of various different casks, but it seemed really, really viscous and really chewy, but not thin. I mean, it's bottled at I think 49.4%. They do, 49.4, which is their kind of distillery strength bottling. Because Lindores Abbey has its kind of claim to fame is that it was the first place on the historical record where Scotch whisky was distilled, back in 1594 or 1494, I think.
Yeah, it's like William Wallace was like drinking Lindores back in the day, wasn't he? He was.
Yeah, and they reckon it was like French monks.
The real one, not Mel Gibson.
Started, yeah.
But I was just going back to the mouthfeel. I think actually he's got this like this pretty meaty mouthfeel to it.
Yeah.
As well, it kind of really does take up space. You know, and it tells you it's there, even though it comes in pretty thin. It actually expands. It's got this like quality where it is you know it's there. It's got a weight to it, which I really like.
I think it's definitely high quality spirit, which is good because it can, you know, really take on that flavour of the cask, but you don't lose the character of the distillate. So, like, you know, when I'm talking about those tropical flavours, the fruit flavours, the banana, the pineapple, I think is coming from the distillate. And that's what I love, is that when you sometimes get whiskies where there's too much cask influence and that's all that you get, and you don't really get to experience the character of the distillate. And knowing, you know, the new make spirit quite well from Lindores and other things that I've tasted, I'd also say of the ones that I've tried, I think Lindores cask style distillate suits bourbon cask style the most for me.
Interesting.
Definitely my preference. I mean, you know, I'm less of a kind of sherry enthusiast these days, but I think this is a really good display of the character of the distillery, mixed with those nice kinds of toasted oak vanillas and, you know, creaminess of the bourbon casks. So, what do we think?
You know, I know why we thought so highly of it on the tour, and as a second point, you know, as we said, this is our first distillery that we went to, so we kind of wished them well. We kind of want them to do good because, you know, it's kind of everything was kind of like it was a pipe dream when we visited a few years ago, you know, and they told us this is what we're going to do, this is what it's going to become, and to see them make this progress is kind of like you know, it's like seeing your little baby boy all growing up. It's you know, you're seeing it grow, you're seeing it mature, and I love it, and so I'm a big fan, and I think I can't wait to see this to keep developing in these bourbon casks, you know, when they start to them, you know, every year is going to add a new dimension to this, you feel.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to, in a couple of years' time, do like a side-by-side to see how far it's come, and the, you know, as the cask influence and the aging has more of an impact on the whiskey? How does it compare to like the first one that came out? When they're on, like, if they do, 4 or 5 series of these, if you have the Castle Lindores 5 and the Castle Lindores 1,
You think
like,
that
what's the
bottle's going to
difference?
last that long?
I've got a backup of this. Yeah, I've got them all. So
Which is the thing, yeah. You actually own every Lindores release that they've ever done, haven't you?
yeah,
You kind of
Yeah.
become a collector of Lindores.
yeah, like all the members' releases, just because we went there.
How's that sentiment?
I think
to
it
you?
was the year that my first little boy was born. So it's just like an idea, like, get bought into the distillery. Who knows where it's going to go. I always think, like, you can always drink it if it's not a valuable asset at the end of the day. So we'll see. When he turns 18, I'll make a judgment call.
Cool. Well, we know. Well, 13 years from now, look out for that video.
I wonder how many subscribers we'll have by then. 135.
Hopefully more, not less than we've got right now.
200.
And super. And so, like and subscribe if it is your first time. Join our wonderful crew of 63 people that are subscribed and watch every week
Religiously.
enthusiastically. Drop a comment, because we never get any comments. And I'd like to see a comment, even if it only says, like, we've never had a hater before. We've not yet to find our first hater, but don't send hate. Just put like a message below saying, yeah, cool video, keep going, guys. We like you. And yeah, so I've had a good time. I'm glad that Lindores has delivered on the memory. I hope you've had a good time. Real Bottle Killer, take him out.
I've had a good time. Well, that was Lindores. Yeah, appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Bottle Killer TV.